Just a little warning for this episode. If you are listening with little ones around, I would strongly suggest, not doing that. This episode covers some adult content because lesser number 11 of Screwtape letters covers some adult content. So wouldn't recommend listening to this one if you're in the car with your kids or you've got little ears around. I also wanted to let you know that I am hosting some writing workshops. If you're listening to this episode as it's come out in January 2025, I am hosting 2 different writing workshops on the 3rd and 10th of February at 6 p.m. British time. And it's for anyone who's really wanted to start diving into their writing in 2025 and develop their writing practice, but they're not quite sure what to write about. And it's a 2-hour workshop where we actually do a writing exercise and we engage with each other and workshop together to help you figure out what topics you should be writing about that are going to light you up. So there are only 10 spots available. If you would like to join, tickets are £37 and you can book them over on my website, christinalynwallace.com. Hello. You're listening to Magic Like This, a C.S. Lewis book club podcast. I'm your host, Christina Wallace. This is the first episode of 2025. Hi, guys. Glad you're here. If you're new to Magic Like This, this is a very in-depth, very slow, very frothy, fun book club that is dedicated to looking at the works of C.S. Lewis. Right now, we are in the Screwtape letters, and we are taking it one letter at a time. There's a lot of C.S. Lewis podcasts out there, and I think they're all awesome. I think there's so many different angles that we can approach talking about Lewis's work. Some people are more interested in his essays or his nonfiction, and some people are more interested in his fiction, or, there's just so many. He left us with such a breadth of work that there's so much that we can say. One thing I will say is I've noticed that other podcasts that cover Screwtape letters will do so in maybe 1 or 2, max 3 episodes because they're moving on to the next book. I have been in the Screwtape letters since October of 2023. I take my inspiration from a chap called Matt Whitman, who runs a podcast called 10-Minute Bible Hour. It's fantastic. You should listen to it if you're wanting a really fun, upbeat, but in-depth way of getting into the Bible. 10-Minute Bible Hour is your go-to podcast. But he spent something like 3 years going through the book of Matthew. And it's approaching that length on Screwtape, which is nowhere near as, in-depth as, the first gospel. That being said, I did take a huge break in 2024 because my health and our brand new dog, who we had just brought into our life in September of 2023, his health really went downhill. He ended up getting some parasites that can't be killed with your regular monthly dewormer. And we didn't know this for the first 6 months of his life, and it did some lasting damage to his stomach and to his brain chemistry. And that's kept me busy for the last year and a bit. And so recording was quite difficult for the sheer lack of quiet time that I had. My dog needed me quite consistently and couldn't settle and couldn't be quiet. But I'm pleased to say, praise God, he is currently downstairs sleeping. And that has become a more commonplace thing. So we're getting back into more regular episodes again. And hopefully we will not be in Screwtape for another year. But equally, I'm not really complaining about it. One of the other things I wanted to say, if you're new here, I always like to give a recap of the structure of this podcast. And this podcast is part of a wider book club ecosystem. So this podcast is part of a book club that is hosted on a platform called Substack. I have recently realized that a lot of people still don't quite understand what Substack is. Substack is effectively a blog meets social media platform. It's as if a blog and I don't know, maybe Threads on Instagram is probably the closest example, Threads from Meta, like as if Blogger and Threads had a baby. That's kind of what Substack is, but people can engage with it in lots of different ways. So there's still some ambiguity around this platform. This platform was designed for writers and content creators to be able to host their content and earn money directly from their engagers, from their subscribers, without there being a middleman, without content creators losing access to their own audience. So the creators of Substack really champion their writers and their artists to have control of their own email lists, etc., etc. Quite relevant after what happened in the US recently with TikTok and people really grieving the loss of major followings. One of the amazing things about Substack is that you own your content and you own your email list of people who subscribe. There is a social media aspect to Substack where people post notes, which is basically like threads or like OG Facebook statuses, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of people who engage on Substack in a much more minimal way, and that they just go and subscribe to a person's Substack and they get that person's weekly newsletters or essays. And that is more or less just like signing up to somebody's blog or signing up to somebody's email list and just having things jump into their inbox. And that is a big part of what I do. I write essays that come out with every episode of Magic Like This. I also write essays that come out weekly over on my primary Substack called The Battle Cry. So The Battle Cry is a totally separate Substack that I use to write about theology, faith, culture, expanding beyond the scope of C.S. Lewis. But a lot of the themes that I explore there are very similar. I share a lot more of my own life story. I get into some very gritty, very hard stuff. I talk a lot about what it means to have faith in the midst of suffering, how to find hope when everything seems dark. And I get very gritty and practical and real about it. So I have my main Substack, The Battle Cry, which is at christinalynwallace.substack.com, and I'll link that in the show notes. But then I have the Magic Like This Substack, and that's where this book club is hosted. And you can access these episodes either within Substack or on your own podcast listening platforms. But each letter that we look at, you can engage in more conversation. One of the other things that I am introducing for the paid tier of the book club, the £5 a month tier, is the ability to email me or comment or message me on Substack to get in touch with me with your questions and your comments about the last episode or about the letter that's coming up, because we're going sequentially. We're about to cover letter number 11. So really allowing the paid book club members to engage more, and then I will go and talk about those things on the next episode. So you might get a shout out and you might get your question, I won't say answered. I am not the oracle of C.S. Lewis, but, I will engage in discussion with those questions. So I really am working towards this sort of book club model that really fosters engagement in C.S. Lewis's work. So that is how the book club works. Now, here's a little bit of an update for you. I have decided to do a bit of a deal with people who want to subscribe to my main Substack and my primary writing over at The Battle Cry. So my paid subscription at The Battle Cry is £8 a month. Right now, that gets you access to all of my free essays, plus my private podcast called The Waffler, where I just waffle about my life and about what God's teaching me in Scripture at the moment, and any new cool recipes that I'm trying, and any other funny stories I've had with my dog that week, or whatever. I waffle. It's fun. It's much less polished than this. It's just a sort of raw, behind-the-scenes look at Christina's life. That's pretty much what it is. So that is a paid feature of The Battle Cry. But what I'm going to do for people who would like all of the perks from The Battle Cry at the £8 a month tier over there is I will also give them access to a paid subscription over on Magic Like This. So you will have access to the paid tier of the Magic Like This episodes and the ability to engage in book club over there, plus all of the paid features over on The Battle Cry. So that's £8 a month. And I'll tell you this much. The writing that I do over on the Battle Cry really does feed into the work I'm doing over here. And I think if you like it over here, you're going to like it over there. So if you want access to both of those things, it is a bit cheaper to jump on as a paid subscriber over at the Battle Cry. And again, that's at christinalynwallace.substack.com. Or if you just want to subscribe at Magic Like This, it's magiclikethis.substack.com. Pretty straightforward URLs. And that leads me to my last little bit of announcements before we actually jump into today's episode. I am launching a writing course at the end of this month. So my whole business ecosystem is very multifaceted. I write for people on a weekly basis. I do these podcasts and invite people into book club and invite them into reading more. I also equip and empower other people on how to write. I'm just like all the literary jollies. And so I am releasing a 4-week, or it takes roughly 4 to 6 weeks to complete, writing course that I spent an entire year working on and developing a curriculum for. It's called Pick Up Your Sword, and it's for aspiring Christian authors who have always wanted to write a book about what God's done in their life. They don't know where to start. It's just this pipe dream in their head, but they're not sure how to practically get their head down and start writing. So I have a background in both creative and academic writing. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in English literature and creative writing, and I worked for 4 academic years as an academic writing tutor. So I took everything that I learned from my degree on the creative writing side and everything that I learned from my career as an academic tutor and put it together to create a curriculum that allows you to operate within both your creativity and your curiosity, to have some free flow imagination and some more structured form, to give you foundations and layouts for how to structure the content of your book and how to even figure out what the content of your book should be. So it's I hesitate to say this because I've intentionally not really looked at what other writing courses are out there. And I know there are many, and some of them are run by people I think are really awesome, who are incredible writers. But I have intentionally not looked at the kind of courses that they have created. And so I can't confidently say that there's no other course like this out there. I can't. What I can tell you is this is all original content that I've curated from a very specific both educational and work experience background, and also combined it with a deep, deep passion and God-given sort of mission from the Holy Spirit to empower people to share their stories. Because I really believe that the work that Lewis has done and the work that so many other incredible Christian authors have done has changed culture. It's been life-changing. Lewis's work has changed my life and my faith. That's why I do this podcast. And I really think that the more Christians there are producing quality writing, the more we're taking up that commission that was given to us in Genesis to shape culture. You know, the words in Genesis are rule the earth and subdue it. And that's quite almost sort of like royal language. There's quite what's the word I'm looking for? There's like a nobility aspect to that, right? Rule the earth and subdue it. I still can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but you guys get me. And I really think that we're still invited into that commission, not in like a dominate type mindset of the word rule. Like that word rule can seem really derogatory. I don't mean it in the context of being like, you know, totalitarian. I just mean it in terms of like, what if we stepped up into our respective spaces in the world, wherever God's called us, wherever our gifts are, whatever arenas we feel drawn to, and we occupied those spaces with excellence, with quality, with confidence, with passion, with surrender to God, with faith, with trust, with joy, with excitement. Like, how much more might culture be shaped? Lewis is such a brilliant example of how great writing, great minds, and intentional, consistent, diligent work in the area that he was called to, how that has shaped culture. And I just really want to empower more people who actually have an incredible book inside of them to write it, to go out, to shape culture, to change somebody else's life the way Lewis has changed our lives. So that's my mission behind the course. There's a lot more information about the practicalities of the course, how long it takes to get through, what we cover in each module, how much it costs, all of that stuff. It's over at my website, which is christinalynwallace.com/course. And I'm going to pop that in the show notes as well. So one of the reasons that I haven't been getting as many episodes out this month, because my dog, praise God, has been doing better, is because I am in the process of getting this course launched. And if you've ever launched anything, you'll know that it is a very all-consuming task. It looks very calm on the surface to people on the outside, but underneath the waters, I am like kicking away like a little duck, trying to get this launch done and get it done well, to make sure that as many people find this course and have access to it if it's going to help them. Because that's our job as kingdom-minded entrepreneurs, as a friend of mine would say, is when we're trying to sell a product, we're not just trying to make a sale. What we're trying to do with integrity is equip and empower people with the information they need to determine if it's the right thing for them. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And it's a lot of work when you're screaming into the void of the internet. So if you've listened to all of this, thank you so much. And if there's a book inside of you about your life that you've been wanting to write, you should head on over to my website and have a look, and email me if you want to. If you've got any questions, you can email me at hello@christinalynwallace.com. So yeah, that's all the stuff that's going on. I've got a lot going on, guys, and I am past the point of being embarrassed talking about it, because I realize that it's an act of service to be telling you all the stuff I'm doing, because for some of you, it's going to really help you and it's going to be really relevant. So I wanted to give you sort of a laydown on what's going on, how the book club works, the new subscription structure if you want to access both the Battle Cry and Magic Like This, and why I haven't been posting as many episodes this particular month as we launch into January 2025. I like to say I'm coming in hot. I've hit the ground running, and I am just like go, 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 go. Releasing a ton of other writing resources in the lead up to the launch. I'm doing one-to-one writing mentorships. I'm doing some writing workshops. You can find out about all of that other stuff if you want to. I've posted about it all over Substack, but also, again, on my website, christinalynwallace.com. So that's all going on. So glad that you've listened to all of that and not switched off by now. If you're still listening, God bless you. Let's get into some C.S. Lewis, shall we? Okay, so we're in letter number 11. And I found this one difficult to understand, to be totally honest. I had to read it, like it's only 3 pages. I had to read it 3 or 4 times. I'm holding it. You might be able to hear the sound of the page turning. I had to read it 3 or 4 times to fully grasp certain aspects of it. But this particular letter is primarily about the role of humor and laughter, but it's also not. It's also there's something deeper going on here. But Screwtape's talking to Wormwood, which, by the way, really brief overview. If you're brand spanking new to Screwtape letters, this is a fictional book about one demon writing letters to his nephew, who is another demon, and the letters are giving him instructions on how to tempt a human being. So cheerful stuff. That's what this book is. And in this particular letter, Uncle Screwtape is writing to his nephew Wormwood about how to sort of utilize the concept of humor and joking and laughter as a tool for temptation. The interesting thing is that the first thing Screwtape does is acknowledge that laughter in and of itself is actually basically a gift from God. It obviously isn't written in those explicit terms, but one thing that Lewis does very cleverly and very consistently throughout this book is remind us that things which, how do I word this? Things which certain generations and certain denominations of Western church culture things that they've gotten, I almost want to say fearful of, cautious of might be a more kind and appropriate term. Certain things that they've gotten fearful of were actually originally gifts from heaven, right? So laughter and fun and silliness would be classed as one of those things. Now, I'm thinking more old school here, like back in, I want to say like the early 20th century. There was a very rigid approach to the Sabbath. There was a very rigid approach to even things like the game Monopoly. There were certain church denominations that wouldn't allow their kids to play Monopoly because they were convinced that because there were dice in the game, they associated that with gambling, and so they just put a squash on it. No Monopoly. It's too close to gambling. Which, by the way, if that's your view, that's fine. I totally respect that. You're still welcome here, but that is not a view to which I hold. I think that that's a bit fearful of something that it just goes beyond the call of duty of what God asks us to do, and not gambling, because you're not gambling with anything but, fake paper money in a game that is quite fun. And that's another thing that Screwtape mentions is like fun in and of itself is a gift from God. And so there's been times where, because Satan has been able to take the gifts of heaven and try to corrupt them, we've started to assume that those things were always evil to begin with. Sex is another great example. The way that sex has been treated within the church is a topic for a whole other podcast episode, to be totally honest with you. And actually, sex is mentioned in this letter as well, but in a slightly different context. But do you see what I'm getting at here? Like, these things that we have grown so cautious around because they've been corrupted or perverted into something that is so different from the way God intended it to be. We forget that actually those things were initially gifts from heaven, gifts from God, and in their original form, in their intended form, are still gifts from God. Laughter and fun and joking and humor falls under that category. But we're often quite weary of certain jokes and certain types of humor because obviously there has become a corrupted flavor of those things, shall we say. So I'm going to start looking at the text here. And I want to start with where Screwtape says, I divide the causes of human laughter into joy, fun, the joke proper, and flippancy. I'm skipping down here a bit. What the real cause is, we do not know. We're talking here about laughter in and of itself. What the real cause of laughter is, we do not know. Something like it is expressed in much of that detestable art which the humans call music. And something like it occurs in heaven. The phenomenon is of itself disgusting and a direct insult to the realism, dignity, and austerity of hell. Now, I've extracted different bits. There's text in between, so you should grab your copy and read this letter yourself. But I've just kind of pieced together the general idea here, which is Screwtape basically saying, the source of what causes laughter in and of itself is as nebulous to us as music and art and beauty. All those things that are so supremely heavenly, effectively, they drip with eternity, with Eden, with the fingerprints of God, because they are just so encompassingly beautiful. Screwtape saying we don't get it. We don't get it. Which basically is Lewis's commentary on saying Satan does not understand the raw, deep, true, rooted foundations of what bubbles up inside of us when we laugh. That aspect of pure, eternity-driven joy he doesn't get. Which, I'm not going to dig into the theology much there, quite frankly, because I don't have it fully formulated in my head. But I do think that commentary is interesting when we think about the fact that Lucifer was an angel of light, and he was, we believe, a musician. I actually need to look into that a little bit. I might need to go and look at some scriptures for that, because I also know some of my pictures in my head of Satan have definitely been influenced by Paradise Lost. And within my own Christian culture, there hasn't been a differentiation between imagery and stories that we gained from Paradise Lost over what's in scripture. So I am like checking in with myself even now to be like, how much of that, where did I read that? So I'm gonna put a pin in that for now. But what we do know is like there is scriptures that talk about like Satan presenting himself in quite attractive terms, which tells me there's a concept of beauty within that that he possesses. But I'm assuming, and this is why this letter was really difficult for me, guys. It's, for whatever reason, it's been harder for me to get to the meat of what Lewis is saying in this one, more than other letters where I've been like, oh yeah, that makes sense straight away. But I'm assuming what he's getting at here is that effectively the demonic realm can only give us sort of a facade of beauty, but there is something deeper and more profound about like the raw, true source of what makes things that are beautiful truly beautiful, that can only really come from God and his design. And we as humans made in his image have been able to access like an ounce of that understanding. And I suspect that makes the enemy jealous. I think that's what Lewis is getting at here, but I'm not sure. So I'm just going to keep going through this letter because I'm sure I'm going to keep tripping up and being like, I think this is what he means. But let's just keep looking. So he then goes into just talking about the concept of fun as it relates to joy. He says fun is closely related to joy, a sort of emotional froth arising from the play instinct. It promotes charity, courage, contentment, and many other evils. Because obviously anything good in the eyes of Screwtape is evil, right? And I just find, again, that little bit quite interesting because I'd never really thought about it. The concept of fun, one of my dearest friends has really taught me to prioritize fun. I'd never really done it before. I'm quite a depressive person. And I fight really hard for joy, but I hadn't thought about the relationship between joy and fun. And funnily enough, my word for this year is fun. I'm trying to actively have more fun in my life, which is something I'd never really prioritized as like a core value in my life. And it's been watching friends of mine who also struggle with depression, who made a real like dig their heels in battle cry of I am going to have fun in this life. And I've watched them do that. And I've realized, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. And that connects us to God in a way I'd never considered. And I want more of that. So as I'm reading this bit, I'm also considering like, okay, Lewis is saying that fun, the playfulness inside of us, promotes charity, courage, and contentment. I haven't really thought about how fun could promote courage. But actually, yeah, in the context of my own business, I have been terrified of going out on my own, being fully self-employed and trying to build a business, doing what I love, which is this, what I'm doing here behind the microphone, what I'm doing with my writing course and my writing students, what I'm doing over on the battle cry and the writing I'm doing, all of that is like just an absolute joy for me, right? But it's terrifying because I don't have a regular paycheck coming in. I don't have a boss to defer to. I don't have a sense of like security in the sense that I know there's an organization that's bringing in hundreds of thousands of pounds and can afford to pay my salary. No, like this is all on my shoulders. In a sense, I know God's part of this and I know that the results come from him. I get that. So don't come at me there. But what I mean is like the life structure I've chosen in my business, in my career, doesn't provide the same kind of stability that an employment would. And it can be really scary. But I've realized recently, as I just did my first writing workshop with a group of students on Monday, it gets less scary when it gets fun. And I had like bonkers amount of fun during this writing workshop that I did earlier in the week. It was crazy fun because I was operating in like exactly where I know God designed me to be, with teaching and empowering other people to write. This isn't like another, marketing ploy of my The first one wasn't a marketing ploy either, but this isn't me trying to market myself here. This is just me saying, I realized all of a sudden where fun makes things less scary and gives me a little bit more courage. If you've been enjoying this episode of Magic Like This, I really invite you to come join us over in the Magic Like This book club. I host a book club over at magiclikethis.substack.com, and we gather together online for monthly book club meetings, and we chat about Lewis, and it's a ton of fun, and it's a bit more of a personable, real-life community of people who are exploring their faith and their theology through the lens of amazing literature and the works of C.S. Lewis. So if you have been around for a while listening to these episodes, or if this is even your first episode and you just love it and you're like, oh my gosh, these are my people, I would really invite you to come and join us over in the Magic Like This book club. It's a paid monthly subscription, and you get access to the book club meetings and the recordings. If you're ever unable to attend a particular meeting, you can watch the recordings back later. And it's just a ton of fun. I would love to have you over there. So all the links and details for how to become a paid member of Book Club are in the show notes. But you can also just head on over to magiclikethis.substack.com and find out all about it there. And so I would ask you, how much do you prioritize fun as a Christian? And where are there areas in your life where you feel like you could do with a little bit more courage? And is there any way to inject a bit more fun into those areas? Because I'll tell you, it's gotten less scary. It's gotten less scary to be self-employed and putting myself out there and risking massive rejection and financial instability. It has gotten a little less scary the more fun it's gotten. So that's just my example. I would love to hear yours. You should email me. You should totally do that. You can email me at hello@christinalynwallace.com, or you can get in touch with me at my Substack, which is magiclikethis@substack.com. I've got 2 different email addresses there. You can take your pick. All right, moving on to the next section. We're going to start talking about how Screwtape uses jokes. And this is the bit of the letter that I had to read 4 times. So here we go. He does a little bit of talking about the joke proper, is what he calls it. And he specifically digresses into the concept of how humans use humor to talk about sex, basically, which, I'm sorry, we all know this, right? If anyone's ever heard a "that's what she said" joke, like, they know. And I think we can all admit to being guilty of making some sort of crude joke in our life. I know I have, for sure. And, some of my closest friends who are also Christians make some really witty, funny, crude jokes sometimes. And I'm not 100% sure what to make of all of this, because I've actually thought about this letter a lot in the context of some of my friends who I know are very God-fearing Christians, and they make crass jokes. We're all married. We're all in, committed, monogamous sexual relationships. We don't see sex as like some sort of product to be exploited or anything like that. But we make some really funny jokes sometimes. And I think there is something to be said about the company that you're in when you're making those jokes and your intention behind them. Because what I've gleaned from what Lewis is saying here, there's a certain motivation with a certain type of crass joke that can lead to what he later describes in this letter as flippancy. So I won't get ahead of myself here. I'm gonna read this section. So he puts, "The truth is that humans are pretty clearly divided on this matter into 2 classes. There are some to whom no passion is as serious as lust, and for whom an indecent story ceases to produce lasciviousness precisely insofar as it becomes funny. There are others in whom laughter and lust are excited at the same moment and by the same things. The first sort joke about sex because it gives rise to many incongruities. The second cultivate incongruities because they afford a pretext for talking about sex. I had to read that so many times. I'm still not sure entirely what Lewis means by incongruities. I know what incongruent means, or incongruent. There's two different ways of emphasizing the syllables there, and I'll tell you what, being an American-born and now British, I can't remember which way to say it. So I'm going to say incongruent. If you say incongruent, that's fine. But I don't entirely know what he means there, other than like the motivation for the joke versus what the actual joke is that's being made seem to be at odds with one another. Like you're trying to come across as though you have a different motivation than what you have. Not entirely sure about that bit. What I can say, what I did glean from this section, is basically, I think Lewis is saying there's some people who they joke about sex because the joke in and of itself makes the sex part of it less sexy. So like as soon as something relating to sex becomes funny, it's no longer, he uses the term lascivious, it's no longer really igniting a sense of lust. It like immediately kills the buzz of lustiness, for lack of a better word. I'm really struggling with my words here today, guys. And so the joke actually like neutralizes the lust element. And so that's why like they'll talk about sex in a funny way in order to kind of make it seem less lewd. Because that's how it feels to them. It feels less lewd if it's funny. And then the other version, the other joker that Lewis is talking about here, is one who will intentionally make a joke about sex because they know it affords them the ability to talk about sex. And they actually are just super horny and want to talk about sex. So they use humor as the like socially acceptable vessel through which to do it. I wrote in here the notes in my book, a funny comment renders a sex story less sexy is the first version of the person, versus second version is a funny comment gives you an excuse to talk about sex. That's kind of what I think Lewis is saying here, is there's two different versions. And I will be totally honest, I still don't know what to make of this. I absolutely think that there are times and situations where we use humor to excuse our discussions around things that are just inappropriate and that objectify the sacrament of sex and lots of other things. And my only takeaway from this section really is to like check your heart and your motivations for why you're talking about a particular thing or why you're making a joke about a particular thing. I don't have much more that I can extract from that other than check your motivations. Because I've certainly seen this type of behavior. I know people who are very, very sex-driven, and they will use any opportunity to make a joke so that it enables them to talk about sex. And if that's you and you're listening to this, hi, God bless you. I'm not coming at you at all. I'm just saying, like, I think this is the observation that Lewis is focusing in on here, and I have definitely seen that. When I've made a "that's what she said" joke, I wasn't motivated by a sense of lust. It was more of just like, I think that's funny type of thing. So I think I would fall more into the category of the first person, where it actually neutralizes the sexiness of something by making a joke about it. I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm quite nervous in this one to be like, I'm quite nervous for this to be the episode that I start inviting more comments, because I feel like it could offend some people and I feel like they might think I'm some sort of heretic who's blaspheming scripture. I'm not. I have such a reverence for the sacrament of sex. But in the context of humor, I think what Lewis is getting at here is like, if you're using humor as a shield to basically dwell in sinful thoughts, then you're losing. I think that's what he's saying. And the next section of this letter talks a little bit more about humor being used as a shield, or actually, I would say as a weapon. So this next bit, oh gosh, do I resonate with this next bit. So Screwtape says, the real use of jokes or humor is in quite a different direction, and it is especially promising among the English, who take their sense of humor so seriously that a deficiency in this sense is almost the only deficiency at which they feel shame. As someone who is a British citizen but grew up in America, I can attest to this. We Brits take our sense of humor quite seriously. It's very important that we're funny. And also, sarcasm's a big deal here. We love our sarcasm in a way that a lot of Americans don't quite get, myself included when I first moved here. There is a very particular type of British sarcasm upon which we pride ourselves. Humour is for them the all-consoling, and mark this, the all-excusing grace of life. Hence, it is invaluable as a means of destroying shame. If a man simply lets others pay for him, he is mean. If he boasts of it in a jocular manner and twits his fellows with having been scored off, he is no longer mean, but a comical fellow. Mere cowardice is shameful. Cowardice boasted of with humorous exaggerations and grotesque gestures can be passed off as funny. Cruelty is shameful, unless the cruel man can represent it as a practical joke. 1,000 bawdy or blasphemous jokes do not help towards a man's damnation so much as his discovery that almost anything he wants to do can be done, not only without the disapproval, but with the admiration of his fellows, if only it can get itself treated as a joke. And this temptation can be almost entirely hidden from your patient by that English seriousness about humor. Any suggestion that there might be too much of it can be represented to him as puritanical or as betraying a lack of humor. And again, my American listeners might not fully get this, but I think that it still happens even in American culture. I have personally experienced a lot of cruelty, particularly in the British culture, but it's happened in the US as well. Have you ever had an experience where you felt really insulted, and when you have brought attention to the insult, the person said, "Oh, it's just a joke. I was just joking. Don't be so serious." I've had this happen repeatedly to me throughout my life, and in particular with comments about my faith, to be totally honest. And I'm not painting myself as a victim here. I don't feel like I'm a victim. I live in a country where I am free to make this podcast and express my Christian beliefs, and I feel incredibly lucky and blessed, and whatever other words you want to use for it. I am not a victim, is what I'm trying to say. But I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge the fact that for a long time I was really confused and led to feel really guilty because I kept feeling quite insulted, and then was made to feel like it was my own lack of humor. It was my fault that I was insulted. I wasn't funny enough. I didn't appreciate good humor enough. There's a few people that I know in my life who are very specifically coming to mind who have used humor as a very sexy, excuse the pun, very sexy shield for getting away with open lust, cruelty, cowardice, addiction. There's so many things that can be made socially acceptable if you can turn it into a joke. And I think it needs to be called out. And I think that's what Lewis has done. Humor, laughter, fun, joy was initially meant to be a gift. But when we turn it into a weapon that we use against one another, when we turn it into a shield protecting us from judgment when we are being outwardly sinful in ways that hurt not just ourselves but other people, again, we lose. We lose the game. We're damaging our own psyche. We're damaging our relationships. We're damaging our identity. We're damaging our reputation. We're causing people to not feel safe around us and not trust us. We're luring ourselves into a false sense of who we are. We're becoming less self-aware. If we use humor to just kind of gloss over a multitude of sins against ourself, but also against other people. And I do also want to say, this is something I particularly noticed as I moved into a new culture when I was a teenage girl many, many moons ago. This was a this use of humor in British culture, I did notice it. It absolutely happens in the US. And I also am sure that I've used it at some point. I'm sure it's been in my toolkit to excuse me from embarrassment or from having to admit if I was wrong. Humor is a really easily accessible way to shield ourselves from shame, to shield ourselves from self-reflection. And I think that Lewis knew that. And I think that he, like he does throughout all of Screwtape letters, called out the subtle ways in which we can just slowly erode our own image that was made to mirror that of the holy, righteous, perfect, almighty God, which I will remind you, you were made in the image of the holy, righteous, almighty God. I won't get into the whole gospel right now, but yes, there was a fall, and yes, there was sin that has made us now broken this side of heaven, but we still bear the fingerprints of the image of God, and we are called as his people to holiness and righteousness. And it's a gift. It's an invitation. It's not a death sentence. It's actually where fun and joy live. It's genuinely where the fun is. People who say things like, I'd rather party in hell than serve in heaven, I'm like, you have no concept. You have no concept of what heaven is. We've got these really caricature-like views of heaven and hell, where hell is like this, fiery pit, and heaven's just this like boring set of like cloud couches where we're just sitting around all day singing. That could not be further theologically from the truth. Think of the most pure, unadulterated joy you have ever experienced in your life. That is a glimpse into heaven. Whoever you are, like the moment that your fiance said yes to you when you were on one knee, the moment you held your child for the first time. For me, it was while I was dancing at my wedding to the sound of fiddles playing in the middle of the purple heather-covered hills of the Peak District in England. That was the most joy I've ever felt in my life. Think of the most joy you've ever felt in your life. The most fun you've ever had. That was probably, in its purest form, a little glimpse of eternity. A little glimpse of like the kind of flavor that God offers us of life. This cheap counterfeit doesn't even come close. You have no idea how much you're going to party in heaven. You have no idea. And so using things like humor to kind of shield ourselves from the self-reflections which invite us to righteousness, which invite us to joy and fun, we're losing when we do that. We're losing. I feel really preachy in this one, but I think it's probably because I have personally experienced this phenomenon of humor being used as both a weapon and a shield in ways that have hurt me personally, and I've seen hurt other people. And I am so certain that I have probably done it at some point too. So I'm not sitting here like this victim who thinks that she's not also a participant in the brokenness of humanity. I certainly am. But I'm going to move on to the last section here of today's episode. So I mentioned a little earlier about this concept of flippancy, right? And if you remember, Screwtape talks about sort of 4 different sources of laughter, right? So there's fun, joy, the joke proper, and flippancy. So the way that he defines flippancy, and this is how the letter ends, I find it super fascinating. Among flippant people, the joke is always assumed to have been made, but no one actually makes it. Every serious subject is discussed in a manner which implies that they have already found a ridiculous side to it. If prolonged, the habit of flippancy builds up around a man the finest, armor-plating against the enemy that I know, and it is quite free from the dangers inherent in the other sources of laughter. It is 1,000 miles away from joy. It deadens instead of sharpening the intellect, and it excites no affection between those who practice it. So I wrote a little note here next to that section that said a slow erosion to kill intellect and the senses. So again, this was a little hard for me to fully break down in my head, but I think what Lewis is getting at here is flippancy is this sense of like, there's enough like cultural context to provide a sense of what should be funny. And so we just sort of treat things as though they're funny so as not to have to deeply think about them. Like sex could be an example, actually. I just got finished watching a documentary yesterday. And I'm not going to name the person. A lot of you might have already heard it because it was pretty big in the news. But there was a beautiful young girl who is on basically a porn site. You probably know the site, but I don't even want to dignify them and give them any form of advertising by naming them. But she hosts her own profile on this site, and she wanted to do a stunt to, earn a lot of income and build some notoriety around herself by setting a record for how many men she could sleep with in one day, setting like the world record for most men slept with in a single day. And this is dark stuff, you guys. And if you're sitting here listening to this and you think that that's okay, then you're probably not going to like my content. You probably figured that out before you got to, 50 odd minutes in. But if you think that that's okay, if you think that that's normal, you're not ready for magic like this yet, because Lewis certainly doesn't agree. And neither do I. I think that that is such a heartbreaking dismissal of the sacredness of this girl's body. And I am not saying this in any way from a place of judgment. I do not think I am any better than this girl because I've been with less men than she has. Not even a little bit. But it's this, not even but. There's no but. My heartbreak for her is that during this documentary, there was so much laughter around, she would make comments like, oh, I'm only good for one thing. And there was so much laughter around just this concept of sex not mattering. It was never said. The explicit joke was never said that sex is meaningless. But there was this implied flippancy about sex and what it's meant to mean. And so as the guy who was running the documentary kept asking, like, why is it that you do this? Like, what do your family think? Like, are you sure you're okay? He asked that after this sex marathon that she had, and she actually broke down in tears at the end, which was heartbreaking, gutturally heartbreaking. But ahead of this stunt that she did, there was just so much flippancy and laughter. There was a numbness to the reality of what she was doing. And I actually think that's the best example I can give to define flippancy in this moment, as I'm genuinely struggling to articulate this letter in the way that I normally can. She would laugh about only being good for one thing. She would laugh about how it was funny. She would, when asked a direct question like, how does it make you feel when people call you certain names? She would just laugh and go, oh, it doesn't really bother me. There was this assumed joke that allowed her to not have to really think about what was being said or what wasn't being said, between the words, what wasn't being said. And I think that what Lewis is saying here is when we get flippant and we just avoid even thinking about the thing. He talks about how people who make jokes at least have to have an intellect that draws them into thinking enough about the topic that they can make connections and create some humor. Humor actually requires a lot of intellect. That's why Shakespeare was so funny. There's so many jokes in Shakespeare and it's treated as a form of wit and intellect. But when you're flippant, there's just you draw on the assumed humor that society's kind of laid down about a topic without actually having to do any thinking yourself in every way. This is actually very meta how multi-layered this comment is that Lewis is making. In every way, he's saying that this form of laughter actually slowly erodes the brain by causing you to not have to think deeply about things, to get numb to things, to just lose a sense of passion or fervor for life in a deep, meaningful sense. And I'm like, shoot, that's dark. But yeah, it would be. These are the instructions of a demon, no? So on that happy note, I am going to wrap it up and just invite all of us to think about not just the heavy stuff, not just like, oh, where have I used humor to kind of avoid dealing with something in my life that I should be dealing with. No. I also want to invite you, like, where can we be having more fun? More pure joy? Where can we be engaging more beautiful laughter in our life? The kind of laughter that awakens us to life rather than makes us numb to life. I think that's a good way to end. And as always, I just want to end with a psalm. So I'm going to pull one up real quick, one that I had in my mind. So I want to just finish with an excerpt from Psalm 18. And it really is just a deep reflection on how perfect God is, how good he is, how that perfection and righteousness, far from being a thing to lord over us and kind of rub our face in shame, is like an invitation to utter joy, to maddening joy. Maybe that's a bad adjective, but like over the top, pure joy. And it all is rooted in the righteousness and holiness and perfection of God. And that's what we're invited into every day when we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we ask God to transform us into one more like Jesus. We're being transformed. Yeah, it's a painful, flippant process, but we're being transformed into one more like the source of all that is good. Like, who's going to say no to that? So here we are. This is a bit from Psalm 18. You, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. With your help, I can advance against a troop. With my God, I can scale a wall. As for God, his way is perfect. The Lord's word is flawless. He shields all who take refuge in him. For who is God besides the Lord? And who is the rock except our God? It is God who arms me with strength and keeps my way secure. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He causes me to stand on the heights. He trains my hands for battle. My arms can bend a bow of bronze. You make your saving help my shield, and your right hand sustains me. Your help has made me great. You provide a broad path for my feet, so that my ankles do not give way. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's pretty cool. Especially when you know that it's true. I'll catch up with you again soon. God bless.